Deep within the archives of European folklore research lies a collection of documents that challenge everything believed about the origins of the Brothers Grimm's most famous tale. What investigators discovered suggests that Snow White may have been more than just a story. It may have been a carefully disguised account of events so disturbing that they required the veil of fairy tale to be told at all. Before we begin, make sure you're subscribed for more eerie discoveries. It was the winter of 1812, in the small German town of Kassel, when Jacob and Wilhelm Grimm first encountered the woman who would change their understanding of storytelling forever. The brothers had been collecting folk tales throughout the German states, documenting oral traditions, before they vanished into history's shadows. The woman arrived at their door during a blizzard that had trapped the town for 3 days. She was elderly, perhaps 70, with skin so pale it seemed translucent in the candlelight. Her name was Margarete Waldman, and she claimed to possess a story that had been passed down through 7 generations of her family. What made Margarete's account different from other folk tales was her insistence that every detail she shared had actually occurred. She spoke not of distant kingdoms and magical mirrors, but of specific locations in the Black Forest region. She provided names, dates, and geographical markers with the precision of someone recounting historical events. According to the documents preserved in the Grimm archive, Margarete told them about a young noblewoman named Maria Sophia von Erthel, who lived in the Lower Castle during the 16th century. The castle, which still stands today, contains something that would become central to the tale, a talking mirror. The mirror was no magical artifact, but rather an ingenious acoustic device built into the castle's walls. Sound channels carved through the stone allowed someone positioned in a hidden chamber to speak and have their voice emerge from behind the polished surface. The mirror had been used by Maria's stepmother, Claudia, to gather information about the household and maintain control over the family's affairs. But Margarete's account took a darker turn when she described what happened to Maria Sophia. The young woman had not simply fled to the forest to escape her stepmother's jealousy. She had been systematically poisoned with small doses of arsenic administered through cosmetics that Claudia provided under the guise of enhancing her beauty. The 7 dwarfs, according to Margarete, were not mythical creatures but rather 7 men who worked in the copper mines that honeycombed the mountains around Lower. These miners were stunted and deformed by their exposure to toxic metals and the cramped conditions of their underground labor. They had discovered Maria wandering in the forest, delirious from poisoning, and had taken her to their remote cabin. What the Grimm brothers found most disturbing was Margarete's description of Maria's condition during her time with the miners. She existed in a state between life and death, conscious but unable to speak or move for days at a time. The miners, believing her to be under some form of curse, had constructed a glass coffin where they could monitor her breathing and pulse while protecting her from the elements. The brothers documented these details in their private notes, but when they prepared the story for publication, they transformed the horrific reality into the sanitized version known today. The systematic poisoning became a single enchanted apple. The toxic exposure that stunted the miners became magical dwarfism. The glass coffin built for a living victim became a fairy tale funeral display. However, the Grimm archive contains additional materials that suggest their sanitization of the story may have been incomplete. Among their papers is a detailed map of the Black Forest region, with specific locations marked in Wilhelm's handwriting. These locations correspond to sites where other young women had reportedly disappeared under similar circumstances during the same historical period. The map indicates 7 different mining settlements, each associated with the disappearance of a young woman from a wealthy family. The pattern suggests that what happened to Maria Sophia von Erthel was not an isolated incident, but part of a broader network of activity that spanned several decades. Most troubling of all is a letter found sealed within the binding of Wilhelm's personal journal. The letter, written in Margarete's distinctive handwriting, was apparently delivered to the brothers months after their initial meeting. In it, she reveals that she had not been entirely truthful about her role in the story. Margarete confesses that she was not simply a keeper of family history, but a direct descendant of one of the 7 miners. Her great-grandfather had been present when Maria was discovered in the forest, and he had witnessed what actually transpired during those months in the remote cabin. According to this final testimony, Maria had not been rescued by the miners. She had been brought to them deliberately as part of an arrangement with her stepmother. The miners had been promised payment for keeping the young woman alive but hidden, allowing Claudia to claim inheritance rights while avoiding the complications of an obvious murder. The glass coffin had not been built to protect Maria, but to display her to potential buyers. The miners had been operating a trafficking network, using their remote locations and presumed isolation to hold young women from wealthy families. The women were kept in a state of semi-consciousness through continued poisoning, making them compliant but preventing them from fully recovering or escaping. The letter describes how Maria's eventual fate differed from the fairy tale ending. No prince arrived to break any curse with a kiss. Instead, Maria died from the accumulated effects of her poisoning, and her body was disposed of in the abandoned mine shafts that riddled the mountainside. Margarete's letter concludes with a chilling revelation about why she had chosen to share this information with the Grimm brothers. She had been systematically approaching storytellers and scholars throughout the German states, ensuring that some version of these events would be preserved in the historical record. She knew that the direct truth would never be believed or published, but she hoped that embedding it within a fairy tale would allow future investigators to piece together what had actually occurred. The Brothers Grimm never publicly acknowledged receiving this final letter, and they made no changes to their published version of Snow White. However, their private correspondence reveals that they spent considerable time and resources attempting to verify Margarete's claims. They traveled to the Black Forest region multiple times, interviewing elderly residents and examining historical records. What they discovered only deepened the mystery. Local church records from the 16th century do document the disappearances of several young women from noble families, all within the timeframe and geographical area that Margarete had specified. Mining records from the same period show unusual patterns of activity, with several operations being abandoned suddenly and their locations sealed. Most significantly, excavations conducted in the 1970s at some of these abandoned mine sites revealed human remains that forensic analysis dated to the 16th century. The remains showed evidence of prolonged exposure to toxic metals and, in several cases, elevated levels of arsenic that would have been consistent with systematic poisoning. The discovery of these remains prompted a classified investigation by German authorities, who found evidence suggesting that the mining operations had been more extensive and organized than previously understood. The investigation was quietly terminated after only 6 months, and the findings were sealed under cultural heritage protection laws. What do you think really happened to Maria Sophia von Oerthel and the other young women whose stories became buried within our most beloved fairy tales? Subscribe to uncover more disturbing truths hidden behind the stories we thought we knew.